Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to tell you about how important it is not to keep your pieces on unprotected squares. Well, if you're beyond the beginner, you'll understand that I don't just mean that don't put your piece on a square where it will be captured immediately. However, if a piece is on an unprotected square, it can get into trouble in various ways. In this lesson, I'll show you examples how a discovery or skewer or double attack can come about because of that. Let's get started immediately with our first example on this theme. In this position, since it's an endgame, Black has two of his major pieces on unprotected squares. What it means is that if a white piece could capture it, no piece could recapture. At the same time, the question is, how can white take advantage of this problem? Well, I'm going to show you what white should do here. First of all, the white rook can and should go to b1 and attack the black knight on b2. Now, if the black knight goes and captures the pawn on a4, then this is what I'm talking about. The knight is able to jump with a check, and here, voila, a discovery, and the black rook becomes history. The best black can do is move out of the check in a way that attacks the white knight, then rook takes rook, king takes, and then the rook would go right behind black's a pawn, which cannot be protected, and white reaches a 1 endgame. Let's go on to the next example. Here we go. This is a normal middle game position that has a completely symmetrical pawn structure and completely even material. Black has one problem that costs him the game, namely the fact that the black queen at the moment is on an unprotected square. Because of this, white is able to win. Try to think what may be the winning sequence of moves here for white. Well, the move is queen g4. This move, of course, threatens with checkmate immediately, which black can defend against in two ways, either by pushing the f-pawn up or pushing the g-pawn up in front of the king. After either of them, the response would be another discovered check. And then again, black suffers because the queen is unprotected. If that queen would be protected, for example, by the rook being on d8, then this check would mean nothing, because the king would just move out of the check, and after queen takes queen, the rook would recapture. But it's not the case in this position. Let us move on. To this position. Here again, black's problem is pretty much the same as in the previous position. Even though black has an extra knight, it is white who has the winning position. And it's mostly because the black queen again is in an unfortunate, unprotected square. Would this pawn on b5 instead be on b6? Black would have no problem, and black would most likely win the game. Here, on the other hand, white again, similarly to the previous example, can threaten with checkmate by playing queen h5, and after black defending against the checkmate, white can sacrifice the bishop with a check and open up the fifth rank, so after king takes bishop, queen takes queen, leaving white with a clear material advantage. Let's see the next example. And again, the story is rather similar. The white queen is on an unprotected square this time, and it's black's turn to take advantage of it. Here, black combines the fact that also the white bishop on a6 is on an unprotected square. Before we go further, try to pause for a moment and figure out the correct move for black. And the correct answer is queen to c6, attacking the bishop on a6. Here the bishop is already in trouble, but even if it would have a good square to go to, the problem is the following move. The rook would move down to d1 with a discovered check and then winning the queen. The next example is a rather interesting one. Here black just moved his queen out from a fork, being on c5 to c4, in the hopes that now if white captures the black knight on a5, then of course the white queen would be hanging. And if the white queen captures the black queen, black just recaptures and in fact has a lovely position with that knight in a nice hole sitting on c4. Well, what can white do? If white moves his queen away, then black will move his knight away, most likely back to c6, and have a pretty even position. However, white has a very sneaky move that wins a piece. And here, the correct answer is moving the rook up to d3, preventing the exchange of the queens while renewing the threat of capturing black's knight on a5. Now, if the black knight moves away, which it shouldn't, because you should always minimize your loss of material, but if now the knight moves away, then indeed, again a discovery comes about. White sacrifices a rook, but gains a queen on the following move. And the next example, in this position, the white king is a little bit further out in towards the middle of the board where we would like it to sit. However, the black queen is on an unprotected square, and this again enables white to win material. The attempt to play bishop f4 to attack the black queen and threaten checkmate with queen takes rook on the following move would fail because in this position the black queen could capture the white rook with a check, and then black would take care of defending against the checkmate on the queen side. So what should white do instead? Well, here it is. White should sacrifice the queen, so after king captures queen, can have a discovered check, giving the bishop up, but then at the end of the day, white came out ahead, being an exchange up. Let's move on and see a position from a real game that was played by two of the chess greats from the 19th century, Tarrasch and Chigorin. In this position, it was white's turn, and again the key element is that the bishop on g4 is not protected by any black piece. If black would get the time and move his rook to the open file to g8, on one hand protect the bishop, on another hand start attacking white's king on the open g file, black would be doing just good despite of having double pawns on the f file. But time is the essence, and time is of course a very important element in chess. In this position, White had at his disposal a beautiful combination that is known as the legal combination. White played knight e5, a beautiful move. If now Black captures the white queen, White checkmates in 2 moves with 2 bishop moves. I bet you can figure this one out. Bishop check, followed by checkmate. Let's go back to the starting position. And in the actual game, of course, Black wanted to delay checkmate and delay losing the game and lose only a pawn. But of course, winning a pawn is much better than not winning anything. And now Black is unable to capture the pawn on d3 without further loss, because now after rook d1, the Black queen has no safe square to go to. A very nice combination. After seeing all these various examples connected to discovery, let's switch to examples that will show examples of skewers. Here we go. In this position, Black has an extra bishop versus White's 2 extra pawns. But Black has 2 rooks that are both on unprotected squares. Of course, the rook on a8 just happens to start the game that way, and as we can see in this position, most likely that rook never ever moved and just got stuck there. So it's oftentimes hard to take advantage of that. But on the other hand, when pieces are somewhere else than in their initial positions, it's more of a danger. And in this particular case, Black suffers because the rook is on h6 unprotected. This is a very typical combination. The natural looking move, rook a6, creating a pin and a second attack on the bishop, wouldn't be sufficient because Black, for example, could move his king back to f7 and protect the bishop a second time. The correct answer is rook capturing the bishop. And then, after king captures, then a rook check on a6, and then the following move, picking the rook up, winning a bishop as a result of the combination. Let's see a similar example on this very theme. Here again, Black's problem is that the rook on d8 is on an unprotected square. That allows White a similar combination as in the last example. Again, pinning with the bishop wouldn't be enough because Black would simply protect the knight a second time and then on the next move his king out of the pin and have a superior position, having an extra pawn. Hope you found the right solution. It's rook captures knight, followed by king takes, and then bishop check, and then bishop captures rook. White comes out ahead again. Just another one to make sure you really remember this idea. In this position, White is in a check. What should White do? A good example to demonstrate that when you get a check, don't immediately look to and move and touch your king, because oftentimes there are better options. In this case, if you would touch your king, you would miss up on a great opportunity on winning a bishop. The correct move is rook takes bishop, followed by the skewer with rook d1. And now let's see some examples when one side suffers because of an unprotected piece, and the motive here will be double attack. In this position, white has sacrificed a piece a couple of moves ago, and it is white's turn. As you can notice, the unprotected black piece is the rook on a4. But how can white take advantage of it? Well, try to figure it out on your own before continuing to listen to the correct solution. The first move is very natural by moving the rook up to c7. Now, if the black king moves down to the 8th rank, whether to the corner or to g8, white would simply move and capture the pawn on h6 with a devastating checkmate threat on g7. But what happens if after the rook check, the king moves forward to g6, hanging onto that pawn on h6, and at the moment white has no way even to check the king, of course without giving up a major piece. And here comes the point that white, with a quiet move, moving the queen back to its starting position on d1, attacking the rook on a4 at the same time, creates a checkmate threat on g4. And of course, black better defends against a checkmate, but then the rook will be lost. A very nice example also from a real game between Richter and Kasper. Let me show you a position now that's very typical from some queen-pawn openings. Here again, black has problems because the bishop on b7 is on an unprotected square. How can white gain a pawn using this problem of black's? If white would play queen b3, attacking the bishop right away, and create a pin along the a2 ga diagonal with the potential threat of knight captures pawn, then black could simply play queen b6, protect the bishop, and now of course knight take pawn would be a big mistake because then black would just trade the queens, and after there is no more pin, capture the white knight. Therefore, white needs to switch the move order around and immediately capture the pawn on e4, winning a pawn, whether black captures the knight or not, because if captures, then fork, queen check, and then captures the bishop. And now let's see a simple example. Here we go. In this position, the black knight is the one out of play and, more importantly, on an unprotected square. This is a simple one. White has a one-move double attack. I bet you found it already. It is queen h5, threatening checkmate and the knight at the same time. Black is helpless, saving his knight. And the next position, it's white's turn. And here, black has only two pieces on unprotected squares, the pawn on h6 and the queen on d7. However, not always is it possible to take advantage of that problem. For example, the fact that the queen is on an unprotected square has no importance in this case. However, the fact that the pawn on h6 is unprotected is very important. And here this is a three-move combination. First of all, white needs to make a trade and to force the black knight onto an unprotected square. And now we're ready for a double attack by moving the queen to d2, attacking the knight and the pawn on h6. Of course, the pawn on h6 is not just a pawn on h6, as after the knight would move away, queen takes pawn would actually be a checkmate at the same time. Therefore, Black better defends against the checkmate and gives up on the knight, which of course gives great advantage for white. And the last example on this theme. This position has arisen from a real game between two former world champions, Garry Kasparov and the legendary Mikhail Tal, at the World Cup in 1989. It's quite clear that white is better, being 2 pawns up. But here, Garry got careless for a moment and captured the 3rd pawn, forgetting that now, because his bishop is unprotected all of a sudden, remember it was protected as long as the queen was on f7, but now it's not, and now black has an opportunity to force the white king onto a position where black will be able to fork the bishop. Therefore, Tal played check, followed by a second check, winning the white bishop, and still white has 3 pawns for black's extra bishop and managed to save the game. But nevertheless, it was a very lucky escape for black. And finally, the jewel of the week, a really brilliant composition by white in 1919. Looks like a bit crazy position, I understand, but still it shows you the beauty in chess. Black has all his pieces, all 16 of them, on the chessboard, while as you can see, white only has 4. It's one of those David against Goliath situations. Also, the interesting part is how white climbing the stairs by giving constant double checks forces black into checkmate. If you feel like, try to figure out the solution. White to move, mate in 12. And the answer is check and another double check. You can notice that when there are double checks, no check can be blocked with interposing a piece. The king needs to moving out of the double checks each time. The king has only 1 square to move to, and the double check continues just like if we were climbing a stair. And keeps going and keeps going. The 2 bishops and the rook beautifully working together in a family. And here, king a7 and rook b7. We're almost there. Now, if the king moves up to a6, the checkmate arrives immediately. Slightly better, or delaying the end at least, king a8, and the last double check, followed by checkmate in the corner. What a brilliant composition. Well, thank you for listening. Hope you remember, try to avoid keeping your pieces on unprotected squares, and if your opponent does it, look around, maybe you can take advantage of it and gain material. Also, I wanted to remind you that feel free to send a game of yours that you play on WCL, and I'd be glad to look at them, and I'll pick the most interesting ones for one of the future WCL game analysis. Thank you, and until next week.